right. Good morning, everyone. It's really nice to have all of you joining us. Today's conversation, Shared Power and Purpose, Board Executive Director Partnerships for Equity and Impact. My name is Eric Nguyen. I use he, him pronouns, and I am the Senior Director of Consulting and Training here at YW Boston. As we move through this opening segment of the webinar, again, please take a second to introduce yourself via the chat. We also have closed captioning available, and you can access that via the closed captioning button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. For those of you who don't already know us, YW Boston is a nonprofit organization dedicated to eliminating racism, empowering women, and promoting peace, justice, freedom, and dignity for all. We share this mission with YWCAs nationally, though each organization takes a distinct approach to the mission according to the needs of their local community. Here in Boston, we focus our efforts on a range of programs and services, including FIRE, our youth empowerment program, a community of practice for individuals in HR and DEI-focused roles, Lead Boston, our premier leadership development program, and a robust suite of consulting and training services aimed at fostering more equitable and inclusive workplaces. Before I share the context for this webinar, please join me in welcoming our two panelists, Wes Enix, Executive Director, and Julie Tamayo, Board Member, both from Literations, and their bios will appear in the chat in 1 second. Literations is a Boston-based nonprofit committed to closing the literacy opportunity gap. They pair highly trained volunteer literacy coaches with first to fourth graders to deliver evidence-based one-to-one literacy interventions. Last year, 200 coaches worked with 550 students across 16 partner sites, conducting nearly 18,000 literacy coaching sessions. And because of these efforts, Literation students finished the school year reading 1.5 years ahead of where they began. I've had the opportunity to work closely with Wes, Julie, and the entire Literation staff since last fall. Following a robust assessment and discovery process, we engaged the organization in our dialogue series, which led to development of a DEI action plan that they're now implementing with YW Boston's support. It's been a real honor for me to partner with them to complete this important work to strengthen their commitment to fostering a diverse, equitable, inclusive, and racially just workplace. So why are we here today? What's the conversation that we want to have? Amidst ongoing challenges to diversity, equity, and inclusion, the relationship between executive directors and their board is more critical than ever. These challenges to DEI amount to challenges to mission, values, financial stability, and in some cases, organizational sustainability. Competing priorities will continue to test the strength of these board executive director relationships, and it's a conversation that we feel like we're not hearing enough about. So Wes, Julie, and I are going to explore how nonprofit boards and executive directors can build strong, trust-based relationships that model shared leadership and mutual accountability around DEI initiatives. Before we dive into our discussion, I do want to share one final thing to round out my framing of this session. As much as we consider our panelists to be experts, and Julie and Wes absolutely are, the one constant in the DEI space is that we're all continuing to learn. And to that end, I've encouraged our panelists to lean into both their strengths and opportunities for growth today. You may hear them say, I don't know, or we're still figuring this out. And to me, it's so important that leaders today demonstrate both vulnerability and humility. So I thank Wes and Julie in advance for modeling these qualities. We're going to spend about 30 minutes of discussion between the three of us before opening things up to some questions from all of you in the audience. And then finally, we'll shift to a short lightning round of questions before wrapping up. We encourage you to submit your questions throughout the webinar by using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom window. All right, so let's get started. I guess I'll start by saying that it was more challenging than I had anticipated to secure panelists for this webinar. And one of the reasons I ran into with a number of folks was that their participation on the panel promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion might invite unwanted scrutiny and put their organization at risk for a number of things, including losing funding. And as I share all this, I do want to acknowledge that different leaders are going to have to make different decisions in this moment for their organizations. But you both immediately said yes when I reached out to invite you to join me. So I'd love to hear a little bit more, maybe starting with you, Wes. Like, why was it so important for you to be part of this conversation today?
Yeah, and first and foremost, Eric, thank you for having us here today, and thank you for your and YW's important leadership in this space. I think it boils down to, certainly in this current landscape, in this political environment and the landscape facing the nonprofit sector, there is a lot of change taking place, especially as it relates to DEI and our work around racial equity. And we have always believed and continue to believe that those are paramount to our mission and our work. Um, Julie and I are actually both at the Liberations office, and we have a all staff gathering today as a part of our racial equity action plan. And I started the day today by reviewing our mission, our vision, and our core values. And really, those core values, the commitment to DEI and racial equity is paramount to that. And we can't abandon those traits, those values, especially during these difficult times. This is when we need to double down and really stay true to who we are as an organization, as a part of our work.
Well, thanks, Wes. What about you, Julie? Why was it so important for you to be part of the conversation today?
I would add to what Wes said, which is like we're not strangers to pushing the boundaries and making sure that the right people are at the table. And in this case, like we're the ones at the table, right? Like we have to help lead these conversations. They're difficult, especially in these times, but they're so important. They're important to us, the work that we do, the people that we serve, everyone that kind of puts their energy into this work is nervous, but yet so passionate and so trusting that we are going to be able to have this conversation and navigate our way through in order to get have the impact that we want to have. So
Great.
that's why.
Cool. So as we're talking a lot about leadership in this moment, and to me, leadership starts with ourselves and understanding who we are, our identities, what we bring to the table. So I'm curious to hear from both of you as you think about your approach to leadership. How have your identities and lived experiences shaped your commitment to advancing racial and social justice? Julie, do you mind starting?
Oh, I don't mind. I think as a woman of color, I'm from the Bronx, and my career has kind of spanned 25 years, let's say, a little more than that. But I started the first part of my journey in AmeriCorps with those core values of service and community. Um, and at that point, my identity, in terms of my identity, I was unsure. Um, I was unsure about who I was and where my place was and how to be able to have impact. Um, and I would say in terms of my leadership, I knew that I was passionate about encouraging others and being part of innovation. And I think what I learned later in my career, for the second half, was you have to be confident and you have to have a seat at the table and be willing to push boundaries to get there. So I think the older I got and the more experience that I had gave me the confidence to be able to find my ways to make space for not only myself, but other voices that are critical to the conversations that we're trying to have and the work that we're trying to do. And to protect those spaces with all of the energy that we have, like that is my work. And so, for those of you who saw my background, I worked in education for the first 10 years and then the medical field for the second 10 years. But no matter where I was in terms of environment, it's always been in a position of influence and teamwork and definitely challenges in fast-paced, struggling environments. And I really have enjoyed that work, and that's where I see myself in the future.
Cool. Um, Julie, I just want to sort of probe a little bit. I know when we were doing some prep, you had talked about just being in these spaces where you didn't always see a lot of people who looked like you, and would love to just hear a little bit more about sort of how that impacted just your own professional development and how that is shaping how you show up today, especially thinking about, your legacy of leadership and how you're creating opportunities for more emerging professionals.
Sure. So Definitely. So the beginning of my career was with literations in the beginning, right? And so even when I think of us as an intergenerational organization, I was a 20-year-old kid basically. And we have older adults and we have kids, and like, where was my place in the organization and in terms of having a voice and finding my place. And then secondly, like being in the medical field, right? And at these tables where influence is mainly kind of led uh, typically by white men who don't really see as much, I don't want to say value, but didn't comport themselves in a way that opened up spaces for people who looked like me or who had perspectives that I did. Um, and I think that that has very much taught me that it's not easy and it's scary work. Pushing boundaries, especially in environments where um, you don't feel like you have a voice or you're nervous about the repercussions of using your voice in certain ways. Um, it's definitely a teaching moment, a lot of teaching moments. But one thing that I've learned is that sometimes you have to risk it, and those risks definitely pay off. And even when you have a little bit of clapback, and those teaching moments teach us that we have to use our voices differently and our words intentionally. Um, and to stick with it even when it does get challenging, that it's worth it, because when you do it for yourself, then the next person and the next person have spaces at that table. So that's sort of the environment that I've been in.
Thanks, Julie. Yeah, and I think risk is going to be part of just the foundation for a lot of our conversation today, right? How do we assess that risk? What risks do we choose to take on? Where do we choose, to hang back a little bit? And I think those are really important decisions that we make as leaders. What about you, Wes? How have your identities and lived experiences shaped your commitment, especially focusing on this commitment to racial social justice?
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly for me, it's first and foremost always being cognizant and aware that I am a white male leading an organization that predominantly serves people of color. I think that in life, I have the privilege of often being in spaces where I don't have to be aware of that identity, unlike my colleagues of color. And so I think, especially in this work, I'm always trying to be aware of that so that I can take a step back so that I can know when to listen and to really learn, ensure that we have the right perspectives and voices as a part of decision making or different things that we're doing as an organization, and continuing to learn, right? And really recognize that as much work as I've done in this space, the more I recognize that I have to learn and grow, and that's a part of the process for sure. And I think for me, I've always been committed as a throughout my life to leveling the playing field. And so I think that oftentimes for my colleagues of color or the communities we serve, there's not a level playing field. And so I think that coming from a place of that privilege, what role can I play in helping to break that down and to further level the playing field for my colleagues and for the communities that we serve.
Excellent. I'm going to stick with you, Wes, for a second longer. As we're talking about each of you as individuals, and this conversation today is about the relationship between the executive director of the board. Can you then begin to shift into just how do your identities, again, lived experiences, backgrounds, your leadership style, even then impact your relationship with Julie and with the rest of the board? Let's talk about how we do this work together in a way that is identity conscious.
Yeah. I mean, I think first and foremost is recognizing, appreciating, and understanding our different identities, right? And valuing the different backgrounds and identities that we bring to the organization and those different perspectives as a part of the work. I think it's also about building trust. So I think that I know that Julie and her, peers on the board of directors trust my commitment to this work and to the mission and values of the organization. And I, in return, trust Julie and her peer board members' commitment to our values and our mission. And we see that play out through some of our decision making when you have to make difficult decisions where some of those issues may come to the forefront. And I'm sure we'll talk more about that here today. Their support in those aspects and really kind of asking the right and appropriate questions, but then, kind of fully getting behind the direction that we're going organizationally and owning it as a part of that collaboration, I think has been key.
What about Julie? How have your identities, again, leadership styles, shaped the way you show up as a board member and how you work with Wes as executive director?
I think, part of it is that I have this space to use my voice, and that we have constant conversations that are transparent, that allow us to um, make sure that we understand where our perspectives are, and kind of what our instincts are to the things that we're working on, and that we're involved, in various committees, right? And so the board is ingrained in the different work of the organization, not in the details, but in the bigger picture. And it lets our identity shine, right? So for me, myself, I feel like my voice and the voice of our teams are there at the tables, and that we're given that space. And I cherish that Wes kind of makes that space for us, right? And that he gives other people the chance to the time and the ability to use their voice, find their voice, and then takes their energy and their feelings into the work and ideas that he's doing. So a great deal of trust, a great deal of vulnerability is there, and I appreciate that.
Great. Yeah. I think what I really appreciated in hearing both of you share just now is that, we can create space, but in the absence of trust, folks may not choose to enter that space. And what it sounds like is that, you've been able to not just create space, but then make it a space that people do, right, want to come into. And I'm hearing Julie, you say, like, I've been able to enter that space, use my voice. And I know that as we move through some of the conversation today, we'll talk a little bit more about, like, how does that trust get built, right? What are the behaviors that we have to model? It's not just lip service, but how do we actually demonstrate that commitment? So one of the things that I've heard it argued that to truly prioritize diversity, equity, and inclusion, your CEO, your chief executive officer or executive director needs to be your chief diversity officer. And it's not to say that the CEO needs to hold the title and the role, but that your CEO, your executive director, has to be the person who establishes and communicates and models very clear priorities related to DEI. They can't simply just delegate this task and this work to somebody else. And so, Wes, like, in what ways do you, as executive director, also serve as your organization's chief diversity officer?
Yeah, great and important question. And I think that it's absolutely, I agree with the statement in terms of my role as a part of leading and driving that work. And I can give, kind of an example related to that. I started at the organization nearly 8 years ago, and early on kind of saw the necessity to lead some DEI and racial equity work, which I kind of spearheaded on my own. We did some work and exercises as a collective staff, and also worked with some consultants as a part of that work. And then around the time of George Floyd, we made the organization decision to launch a racial equity committee that was made up of staff members. Some representatives from our volunteer corps, as well as a member or members of the board of directors. And at that time, I made the decision to not serve on the Racial Equity Committee. And I made that decision because I felt at the time that I really wanted the group to feel like they were leading the work, that they could make those decisions in terms of what they thought the organization needed to drive forward related to the racial equity work in and around the organization. And I think in hindsight, I realized that it kind of created some barrier or conflict around really understanding kind of what do we have the ability to do or not do? Are we sure Wes is going to be okay with this? Are we going to get the support of the organization? And I think there was a missed opportunity for me to show not just the people of that committee, but the rest of the staff that like this is a priority for me. This is one of my top priorities, and we are going to continue to support and push forward this work. And this is how I'm going to do it as the executive director of the organization. And so now, as a part of our new racial equity action plan and the work that you've been doing with us, Eric, we are kind of relaunching that committee and that work as one of our actions. And I am serving as a member of the committee. I'm not the head of the committee. I'm not the chair of that group. That's another staff member, but I'm an active member of that group so that I can really be a part of ensuring that all of the support that is needed to move that work forward is there.
Great, thanks. I think it's a great example, and I think it's something that a lot of leaders struggle with, right? Is again, how do we create space? How do we navigate some of these power dynamics? But in the absence of very clear, intentional plans and relations for how we communicate, how we, set expectations and so on, things can get derailed pretty quickly. So it's been really exciting to see, this reimagining of the Racial Justice and Equity Committee and thinking about like who are the people who need to be at the table for this? How do we engage in these conversations? Julie, thinking about the board perspective, how are you empowering and supporting Wes in prioritizing diversity, equity, inclusion for Literations?
I think it's part of all of our conversations, right? So it starts at the very level of how do we hold ourselves accountable and how do we hold Wes accountable, right? So looking at, our evaluation system, for example, and making sure that that mirrors our priorities, our core of racial justice, and then making sure that our presence is where Wes needs it, right? So making sure that we are ingrained in the various committees, program, finance, marketing, etc., that allow us to be able to ask the hard questions at the table, right? That keep us focused and to bring us back when we need to, not to be in the weeds, but to really make sure that we're creating a space for the people who are at the core of our work. And then I would say that I always ask Wes this question, like, what do you need from us, right? Like making sure that we're making space to let the staff and Wes really define what our work is as the board. What's our challenge to help support their work, right? Because they take care of the details. They take care of making sure that the everyday operation of our mission happens. And yet, we ourselves need to make sure that we are available to do that and that we're in the places that we need to be able to do that.
Cool. Would love to just circle back really quickly to something you had said just at the beginning. You talked about accountability, you talked about evaluation. One of the things I like to say is, what doesn't get measured gets ignored, right? What doesn't get measured isn't seen as important. So you mentioned evaluation as a way in which you're able to hold Wes accountable. Can you talk a little bit more about what that looks like in terms of the conversations that take place throughout the year, but also, what the evaluation process looks like? And Wes, I would love to then come back and just hear you talk about your experience of it as well. But Julie, let's hear about the board evaluation process for Wes.
Sure. So, we all came together in a meeting and made sure that the questions on the evaluation mirrored the values and the impact that we wanted to have as an organization and what his role was in making that happen. And then making sure that each of our committee chairs, so I'm the committee chair for programs, for example, had an opportunity to speak about my experience and my perspective as far as Wes contributing to ingraining, to bringing all of that work into our programs operationally. So specifically, one of the things that I was really impressed with was how Wes was able to bring staff together in a retreat and be able to recenter our work, right? Making sure that we're all caught up on the same page about how it shows up operationally in the field. And then um, how how successful we are in terms of making sure that that the goals that we have align with that, right? So uh, I know we're going to talk about it later, but very quickly, we can talk about funding, for example, and how difficult some of those decisions are and how scary some of those decisions are. But as an ED, being able to look at our organization and say, perhaps this is an opportunity that we need to broach, to step away from one stream of funding in order to really connect with and sustain the real core of our work, right? The justice part, the equity part, the community part. So, really looking at those proposals and ideas and looking at and being involved in assessing kind of what the risks are and what the opportunities are, and then seeing it put into practice and evaluating, hey, did we get the result? Hey, are we making sure that each person feels valued and present in the process? Like, that's part of our work, right? Because in programs we work with the volunteers, we work with the kids, and we want to make sure that they're involved throughout the process. Does that speak, Wes? I know I kind of ran through that, but how does it feel to you, let's say?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head, and I think that I think as a CEO ED, you need to want to have these elements as a part of your review and evaluation as well, right? Like you need to want to be held accountable to these measures, just like the other outcomes and successes of the organization. And so I think that that helps ingrain it within the process. And as Julie talked about, as a part of my review, those, racial equity and DEI goals that we have set being a part of that. And, for review with the board and on a regular and ongoing basis. And then also kind of, part of my review is asking for staff feedback on certain aspects of my goals and responsibilities and incorporating that within the questions that are being asked of staff about my performance. So I think that those are all, helpful and effective ways. And I think that, this relates to some other aspects too, but one of the things that we do is ensure that, okay, we've got Julie and another board member, Ms. Pat, who are board representative and a regular part of our racial equity action plan and DEI action plan. But we make sure that at each board meeting or at most board meetings, we are providing, especially when work has happened, we're providing an update to the entire board of, okay, here's the work that has been happening, here's where we are, here's where we're going next. Space for conversation and dialogue so that even though Julie and Ms. Pat are the representatives, all board members feel a part of the process and feel like, they are up to speed and getting the communication about what's happening.
I would add, and here's what we need from you, right? Like, that is the
Yeah,
big thing, is making sure that we are
totally.
making an ask to push the work forward.
Yes, absolutely.
Terrific. Terrific. You've both broached this a little bit, but I'd love to just bring this into the conversation more explicitly, which is what are some of the practices or agreements that are in place to help you build that trusting, equitable relationship that you have between the board and executive director at Literations right now?
I
Uh,
think
yeah, Wes, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to jump right in, but I had on the tip of my tongue that I think relates to many things is like clear roles and expectations, right? I think that where I've been very fortunate is that there's always been a real clear understanding of the difference between my role as executive director and the role of Julie and her colleagues as the board of directors, right? And that I am responsible for the day-to-day running of the organization and all things that happen as a part of our regular operations. And the board is responsible for the strategic oversight, for the counsel and advice where needed, for the troubleshooting or problem solving at certain points, the fiduciary responsibility, the governance of the organization and those bylaws and policies. And so I think that we've had some great board chairs, our current board chair, Amy Danforth. I think the board chair role in terms of ensuring that the entire board is clear on that and kind of continues to understand their role as board members is really important and continuing to revisit that. And I think that that has, helped a lot. And I think also, hopefully, it's more a question to Julie. Hopefully she and her peers feel like myself, our leadership team, and staff of the organization are bringing forth to them the work of the organization. Where are our challenges? What are the things that we need to navigate that they can provide some insight and counsel on? And that we're, kind of continuing to keep them posted on, the workings of the organization and where our challenges may lie.
I would add too that my perspective is somewhat different from other board members. The board is very diverse on our part in terms of identity, in terms of background, in terms of professional backgrounds, and I have the unique experience of pretty much being ingrained for the first half of my career in the details, right, in the weeds of programs. And so I think stepping away for 10 years really allowed me to come back with a different perspective of um, a lot can happen when you're not in the weeds, right? And I think some of the unspoken practices that we have are, that consistent check-in, but also that they're honest and I don't want to say casual, but it is very like there's a lot of active listening in that, right? It's not only the words that come out of our mouth, but making sure that we're understanding what's not being said and being willing to explore that a little bit, um, and making sure that there's humility in everything that we do, right? And I very much appreciate um, Wes's ability to his compassion and humility in all of these situations, and that gives me a lot of confidence to step back, right, from the weeds. Because when you kind of start your career there and that's what you're most passionate about, it is very easy to step into a place that you want to know more, you want to be involved, and yet working with Jen, who's the program director, and then working with Wes has given me a lot of confidence and freedom, right? I have a lot of freedom to have different conversations and push different boundaries, but not get lost in the details. So I really appreciate those kind of practices that aren't necessarily anything that we've talked about.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think also too, just to get back to that, I mean, we've talked a lot about it, but that trust factor, right? Julie is a board representative as a part of our action plan work, and we've had some staff retreats that Julie's been a part of, and a couple of difficult conversations on different things related to this work. And there's been some staff members of color who have reached out to Julie to have one-on-one conversations about things they may be feeling or experiencing. And I have the trust and knowing that Julie's going to have that conversation without me involved in supporting that staff member, but also having the organization's best interest and kind of support in mind related to our overarching goals. And so I think that comes down to trust, like being able to have that trust on both sides as it relates to those things.
Great. I'm already envisioning an entirely separate webinar that focuses on the
Yes.
roles and expectations piece. I think it's one thing to say, we need to have really clear expectations for board members, for EDs, what are they, but it's so easy to begin to blur those lines. It's really easy for board members to get pulled into the weeds. And I know you all have volunteers who are part of your board. And so their day to day is in the weeds. And yet, as board members, they have to get back away from those. And so I think there's an entirely different conversation that we could have there as well. And I imagine a lot of our audience members, right, are wondering about that as well. Before we shift to audience Q&A, and so I just want to invite folks, if you have questions, drop them into the Q&A box. But Julie and Wes, tell us about a time when you had to navigate a challenging situation related to your diversity, equity, inclusion priorities. Um, Curious a little bit about like what made the situation so challenging, and then what helped you move through it. Wes, do you want to start?
Sure. I think I can speak to very recently. We have had traditionally, some federal government grants, and we, like many others, recently received in the spring communication around kind of our work around DEI. Specifically, we provide all of our volunteers with a cultural competency and cultural responsiveness training as a part of ensuring that they're showing up for the students that they're working with in the best way. And that is essential to who we are and the work that we do, in addition to our other DEI work. And so, we had to have a conversation as an organization, as a board of what do we prioritize most? It's back to that mission and those values. And ultimately, we, said there's no way that we can stop doing that work. There's no way that we can stop doing those trainings and all of a sudden say, oh, because of money, we're not going to have all of our volunteers go through that training that we think is paramount to how they show up for the students that they're working with and serving. Like, I couldn't look myself in the mirror every day, and I think that that's how many others feel. But I recognize those are really, really difficult decisions that a lot of organizations are going through. And I think an aspect of that helps, that I've talked to some in peer organizations, is how do you engage the communities you're serving in those conversations, right? Like, how do you engage the constituencies that you're supporting and serving? For us, whether it's the families or the schools that we serve, our volunteers that are part of our program and are community based. For others, it may be, the direct service providers that you're providing services to. Really asking them and involving them in the conversation, I think is key. And so I think certainly we had some conversations at the board level of like, okay, what is this financial impact going to mean for us to, not have these grants anymore? Additionally, we have a grant that provides us with through AmeriCorps, that provides us stipends for some a subset of our older adult volunteers to be a part of our program. And so we were not only saying, okay, we're not going to receive the money from that grant to support that and pay that stipends. We also were making the decision we're going to privately pay for those stipends out of our own budget. So we were kind of like doubling the reverse of the impact, but that's back to our values. That's who we thought we are. And thankfully, we've had some strong organization and board reserves where we felt like this is why you have those funds. This is why you have those rainy day resources and those times. It's for times like these. There's no other time to wait for. It's now. And so, we're kind of doubling down in that area. And, I think there was some dialogue and tough conversations, but it kept coming back to what is our mission, what is our values, and ultimately everyone was in full support and on the same page. And I just feel grateful that Julie and her peer board members were all collectively, maybe they were having some side conversations or kind of, really wondering and questioning, but as a group, they were like, we fully support this and are behind the decision on this front.
Yeah, so it sounds like just a lot of coming back to mission, coming back to values, thinking about what are the resources you have at your disposal. Julie, when we were, prepping for this, I want to hear your perspective, but one of the things that you said that really struck me at the time was trying to navigate or balance instinct, right, in these moments. A lot of times that instinct is worry and fear versus staying in a place where you can be very intentional, right? Leaning into those values, leaning into mission, doing what you know is right, even though there is a lot of uncertainty. Can you talk a little bit about how you and your other, your board peers navigated that instinct versus intention tension that you were feeling?
Yeah, I think, it looked effortless and maybe felt a little effortless to Wes. But going to a question also that I see from Matt Pritchard in the chat, which goes along with this, is that you have to you have to make sure that this work is at the core of your everyday passions, right? Like this is where the organization's direction is, and then making sure that everyone feels comfortable with that. And I think you're right, like instinct versus intention, right? Everyone on the board collectively felt like the intention is there, right? Like this is what we're about. And yet we had varied feelings about the details and what the impact would be on our volunteers, on the kids, on the program. What happens if we lose funding? Like a lot of uncertain things that were, some of which is in our control and some of which isn't, right? How would, the change of a non-taxable stipend versus a taxable stipend impact our individual volunteers, right? And how does that support equity, right? Like we want to create that space that they are, you know, being able to continue with a standard of living that they have, and yet honor the work that needs to be done. And I go back to this idea of like, we are a business, but we're a business of people, right? And so making sure that as we move through this process, that for those of us who have an instinct that it's not as black and white and as um, not as confident that it will land in the best of places, right? Like that, those of us who have that inkling that we have a process in place, where we can do those constant check-ins, right? Like where we have that ability to reflect and pause and make sure that the volunteers collectively feel safe, that they have that they feel represented at the table, that they feel heard, and that we're making sure that we can do everything possible to honor them, right, in the work. So I think, in terms of making sure that we're bringing other board members forward, like it's not in terms of intention, it's just in terms of the details. And so then that means that our process as we move along is that we have check-ins that are honest and transparent, and that if we say, oh well, what about this or what about that, that we're taking the time to explore them, even if it's not in that meeting, right, but in the work, um, that happens. So I don't know if I answered your questions completely, Eric, but um, that's the space that I feel like we're in right now. We're kind of in it.
One other thing I'll add, and I think it also relates to a question that's in the Q&A that certainly relates to this, is that sometimes there's this question about, okay, where does the DEI work, kind of parallel to the outcomes and goals that are trying to be achieved. And they are not mutually exclusive. They are collective and one whole. Like I know and wholeheartedly believe that us driving the DEI and racial equity work is going to improve our outcomes for the students that we serve, allow us to serve more students, better support our literacy coaches and our staff throughout the organization. So those are not two mutually exclusive things. They are one collective thing that is helping drive our, goals and outcomes that we're trying to achieve as an organization as it relates to our program.
Great. Thanks. And Julie, you definitely did answer the question, and just added, I think, some really great details in there as well. I really appreciate what you said at the beginning. Is like it might have looked really easy, it looked really smooth, but really underneath the surface, there's just a lot, right, that you had to work through. And I think it's a sign of a really well, highly functioning board, a highly functioning board ED relationship. And yet, these conversations are never easy. And, Wes, you had talked about the financial decision was not just losing funding, but then it was replacing that funding, right? And so that double whammy of the decision that you had to make as well. And I appreciate both of you just pulling in some of those audience Q&As as you were going along. That makes my job as the moderator facilitator here just so much easier. I'm going to sort of shift gears a little bit. And one of the questions that came in I think is really interesting is if you can share some tips on how to make these relationships last. So how do you maintain the relationship between the board and ED over time? And how do you keep things fresh and engaging? Julie, do you want to go first?
Sure. Um, hmm. I think definitely there has to be some element of fun. I think, the fact that um, we can have tough conversations and still come out on the other side on a positive note, is important, right? Like that has it. Your work has to be fun. If that's not where you find your joy, then you're going to have challenges sustaining it. And I think making sure that we're working in rhythm. I think that is something too that if you're not checking in regularly about whether we're moving the way we each need to be moving in order to support one another, um, then that's going to be hard to sustain as well. Um, and I think, I don't know, I think again, like just making sure that we're asking the hard questions along the way. That's not just like a stamp on a piece of paper. Does that make sense? I don't know how to frame that, but when I've been offered other board positions, and Literations was the first one that I took, and I think I took it because I knew it wasn't just going to be a token yes or no, or a token, here's the work, the checklist that needed to be approved today, but it was really make having those meaningful conversations and making sure that we're creating a direction for the work of our volunteers and our students, right? And so I think to make a board members and an ED's relationships sustainable and long lasting, I think you have to have that freedom to be able to do that, right? I don't know, Wes, what do you think?
Yeah, I think totally agree with everything you're saying. Those social times are important. Times we come together just to kind of get to know each other. I think certainly also with the rest of staff, like how does the rest of our staff at all levels of the organization get to know the board members, who they are, the role that they play? Even if that's only a couple times a year, that's important to kind of build those relationships and connections. I also think that uh, one of the things is the mission alignment and the passion in the work that we do. One of the things that we always look for in new board members, first and foremost, is do they believe deeply and care deeply about the work that we're doing? And we've had times where we've said, this board member could bring a lot to the table, but they don't seem, the mission seems less of the focus for them as a part of their interest. And so we've said no. And I think that that is a big part of what has made kind of our board very strong, our connection to the organization and the rest of things is that everyone comes with different backgrounds, experiences, and skill sets, but they all have a passion for the work that we're doing and are deeply committed to ensuring that that's successful.
Yeah. What I'm hearing from both of you is this this contrast, right? That the relationship needs to be grounded in trust and vulnerability. That's something that we established pretty early on. And then I heard you, Julie, bring in this concept of fun. We have to be able to have these hard conversations, and like we have to be able to come out the other side and respect that like this work is hard. And how do we maintain our humanity amidst all of it? But I also heard each of you talk about is actually this desire to ask the hard questions, to lean into the hard conversations, to challenge each other. And I think I want to just emphasize that, right? Because I think when you step into the role of an executive director, you're assuming that challenge. You're saying like, I want to lead and I am ready for these hard questions. And when you step onto a board, you're in charge, right? Like your role is to sustain this organization. It has to be mission driven. It has to be financially sustainable. So what I hear you both saying is like we want to be able to challenge each other. That is actually a way to sustain this relationship. That is a way to keep things fresh and engaging, is when we do lean into the hard, aspects of the work as well. So thank you for that, because I think it's something that we sometimes forget as we move through this. I had promised some just like very quick lightning round questions. It's a way just for folks to get to know each of you a little bit better as people. So, just what is one word that you would use to describe Literations, Wes?
Learning organization.
Okay. And Julie?
Engaging.
Cool. What is one accomplishment that you're proud of during your time at Literations? I'll start with you, Julie.
I think again, having those hard conversations in your car while your kids are in the back feels successful.
The context there for folks is that like I don't know how many calls I've been on with Julie now where like you're just in the front seat of your car in a parking lot because you're shuttling kids to and from practice, and but you're showing up in the ways that you can. So Wes, what about you?
Uh,
Accomplishment that you're proud of?
I mean, there's so many, but I think certainly about 4 or 5 years ago, our organization totally shifted our program model. And that was based on a random control trial in terms of how we saw we best support and serve students. And we made a conscious decision to say, we're going to serve, we're going to go from serving thousands of students to serving, several hundred, but we're going to do it in a way that really shows the impact and outcomes in that 1.5 grade level that you talked to, Eric, and working with them one on one as opposed to small groups. And now we're scaling that back up based on our success and our outcomes. And so I think I'm really proud of kind of the organization and everyone's work in making that shift and back to that learning of saying, like, we're always striving to get better and improve, make the tweaks that are necessary to best support our school partners, our after school partners, our students and families and volunteers.
Wonderful. Sticking with you, Wes, if you could be the executive director of an organization other than Literations, where would you be?
Ooh, it's a tough question. I feel passionately about this work because of the relationship component, and also I was a kid who struggled in school, and so I was fortunate to have access to resources like Literations to help me bridge the gap. So I feel deeply passionate about the work, but my background prior to Literations was in the mentorship space. I was with Big Brothers Big Sisters in the Philadelphia area, and then Big Sister Association in Boston, and so. I think probably in mentorship or relationship work, I believe deeply in the impact that relationships can have in creating change.
Awesome. And Julie, if you were to be on the board of another organization, where would you want to be?
Actually, last month I joined our baseball and softball board, which I didn't even know existed. And I think because, again, you have to have the voices at the table, right? You have to create a space. And so I'm on a board with a bunch of dads. Um, and that's what we're doing. We're pushing boundaries to make space for, you know, kids of parents who are like me, who have less time or who have less ability. Or I think of, parents who have two jobs, and or who don't have a ride to get their kid to practice. And I want to see programs be able to honor kids with different abilities, and parents who really want their kids involved and want to support them, but maybe don't have the resources. So that's kind of where I'm at right now.
Excellent. Cool. And then last question, Julie, what's a piece of advice that you've received that you return to often?
I think keep your compass front and center.
Mm,
You know, my dad always taught me that you really have to know what's right and wrong, and making sure that that is just so clear for yourself and for everyone else around you. And I think that that has served me right. And yeah, you can get into the technical. My dad went into all the technical of, like, oh well, this magnetic field can mess with your compass, and it made me think about, like, yeah, that's my dad. How, like, you can always have interference from the outside circumstances that can make things foggy. But if you're really clear on what your compass is and you always keep it up front, then that little moment of gray won't disturb your path. So I think that's where I come back to every time.
great. Same question to you, Wes. Piece of advice that you've received that you return to often.
Yeah, I mean, I think that for me, it's, that failure is not the opposite of success. It is a part of
Mhm.
success. And that is certainly true in this work. Like, you've got to be willing to fail and recognize that that's a part of the process, and really get messy with it. And I think that's the other thing that I'll say is that sometimes I, attend webinars like this and you listen to the speakers and you're like, wow, they've got it all figured out. How do they have it all figured out or whatever? And it's like, Julie and I can tell you, we've got plenty of challenges within the organization that we are working through and addressing and trying to deal with, right? And so you have to kind of own that in every aspect of this work. And then leading an organization, you're gonna fail and you're gonna fail a lot. But how do you learn from that? How do you grow from that, and how do you move forward?
Great. Thank you so much to both of you. And I think those are both just two incredible pieces of advice that I will be thinking about now too, keeping that compass, right? Failure is a part of success. So As we wrap up now, just want to thank everyone who's joined us today. And again, in particular, I want to thank both you, Julie, and Wes for spending time with us this morning. Just your generosity of your time, your expertise and insights has been incredibly enlightening. I also want to thank a number of YW Boston colleagues who have supported this webinar from ideation through delivering today. There are a lot of really great questions we didn't get a chance to this morning, and your questions are always really important to us as we think about how we understand your needs and priorities and how we can develop strategies to continue, meeting the most pressing diversity, equity, inclusion challenges today. So please see the chat for lots of different ways in which you can stay in touch with us after this webinar, including contact information for my colleague, Nicole Bhatia, who's our Director of Partnerships. She's always really excited to talk to folks to discuss how YW Boston can work with your organization to advance your DEI goals. And in particular, I want to highlight an upcoming event taking place this fall. It's our inaugural Intergenerational Women's Leadership Summit taking place on September 30. So please do make sure that you're on our mailing list to receive more information about this opportunity. And finally, just want to invite all of our attendees today to consider supporting YW Boston and the work that we do. We're dependent upon your generosity, generosity of people like you so that we can continue to do this important work in our greater Boston community. And that includes offering webinars and learning opportunities like this one free of charge to all of you. So as we march into our 160th anniversary next year, we're looking for 160 accomplices to act with us now. No matter the size of donation you can make, every donation makes a powerful statement about your support in sustaining our important work. So I just want to wrap up again by thanking Wes and Julie, everyone who's joined us today for this incredible conversation. Have a really beautiful day. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.